welcome to Kilas Ner Avram and the weekly Shir and Avodas HaParsha. So again, it's always tempting in the Arba Parshas to just try and focus on those special readings for the Arba Parshas, but then you kind of miss the regular Parsha, which is here, which is Parshas Shemini. And as we usually do, we try to take one tiny micro topic with a lesson that we can put into our Avodas Hashem from it. So I found a very interesting drasha. It goes on for a bit in what was basically the first Sefer Chasidus, the Toldos Yaakov Yosef. Yaakov Yosef of Polna, he was already a Rav and a Talmud Chacham before he got connected to the Baal Shem Tov, and his Sefer, Toldos Yaakov Yosef, brings down many of the first-hand quotes that we have from the Baal Shem Tov. So he spoke about the first pasuk in the Parsha with a remez that's not his, it comes even from before. The Parsha starts, Vahi bayom hashmini, Kara Moshe la'aron u'levano v'leziknei Yisrael, Vayomer al Aaron kach lecha egel. Okay, stopping it there. Meaning, there was a period of the Shivas Yimei HaMiluim, the preparation for the Kohanim now to actually be active and to act as Kohanim and to serve, and that Yom HaShmini is the day that it's going to be done. So, on the Yom HaShmini, Aaron and his sons are told to bring a korban which is an egel. Now we're going to see the importance of this egel in a second. So first we'll read a little bit from the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, what he says, and then we'll show how it ties into the psukim. The Toldos says, Haremez bazeh, he said, this is a hint to Talmidei Chachamim hayoshvim kol yameim bebotei midrashos mufshatim u'mivdolim mikol iskei olam hazeh. There are some people who have the privilege of being Talmidei Chachamim who spend all their day in Beis Medrash, separated from any of the involvements of Olam Hazeh that have to be done, not business, not travel, not this and that. Oskim b'Torah Tefillah v'Avodas Hashem Yisbarach. They learn, they daven, they serve Hashem. Now people think, great, what a great existence. You know, it's like spiritual, nirvana, this idea that you're separated from all dangers. You know, you kind of leave the Yetzer Hara at the door, and you're there involved in Kedusha. Wrong.
What else does he say now?
Oh, so he says, Hine lif'amim alul likanes belibam eze machshavas geus upnius. A person get a little bit uppity, a little bit arrogant, right? Because they feel, what can you do? We are higher level people. Hisnasus, right? From the Lashon of raising, we are more elevated than other people. These other people, it's not their fault. I mean, they have to be out there in the schmutz, so to speak. They're out there doing these things. Whereas we, right, are totally living, walking, breathing Kedusha. He says this is a very, very big mistake. He says, number one, the mistake is thinking that the Yetzer Hara stops at the door, right? And that somehow, just because you're not facing the challenges of a person who's out there in Wall Street or, the city in London or whoever, wherever you are, that you don't have nisyonos. He says this thought itself is a tremendous nisayon. The idea that you may feel arrogant, you may feel better than others, you may look down on others. He says, Mida gerua hi ma'od, that is a very, very negative midah, a terrible midah. Od yosim mikol asher hamaisim habilti tovim. He said it is worse than all of the actions that you're imagining that the people who are out there with their exposure are doing. Your arrogance is worse than that. Okay, so now we have to realize, Gaiva, when you look in Chazal, the descriptions of it are equivalent to Avodah Zarah. There's a Gemara in Sota Daf Dalid. Welcome. There's a Gemara in Sota Daf Dalid that goes through a person who's misgoya, a person who's arrogant, that it's as if he's had all of the forbidden relations in the world. It's as if he's committed Avodah Zarah. It's arrogance is viewed, aside from what Chazal say, that if a person is arrogant, so the Shechina says, I can't be with him. Leaves no room. Meaning, he can be learning, he can be davening, he can be there, but if he's arrogant, so then he's brought such spiritual negativity, much more than what he imagines other people are having in their downfalls in their interactions in life. So why does it particularly come in this pasuk? So he brings a remez from the Sefer Toldos Ephraim. From what I looked up, the Toldos Ephraim is a sefer by the Kli Yakar, right? It was in the late 1500s, early 1600s. He says, Egel is Roshi Tevos, Arayos, Gezel, and Loshon. Okay? What does that represent? Arayos are forbidden relations. Gezel is stealing. Loshon represents Loshon Hara. Because Chazal said in Bava Basra,
which is like killing.
which is like killing, correct. So Chazal said in Bava Basra that Rov Begezel, the majority of Am Yisrael, in some point, in some way, has some aspect of something that we've taken that isn't really supposed to be ours. He says, Miut Ba'arayas, a minority of people have transgressions in forbidden relations. The Hakol, and everyone in Avak Lashon Hara, in the dust of Lashon Hara. So even if it's not the full-on D'oraisa Lashon Hara, but like the Chofetz Chaim gives examples of Avak Lashon Hara, of saying something in a way that can be interpreted negatively, things like that. Okay, now, wait a second. How is it that, so many people transgress so many things? It says, the Chachamim, when they say Ki'ilu, they say many things that are as if. They're not just throwing it out in order to try and tell you this is really bad. Somebody once said, right, what are the three lightest averos in the Torah? Avodah Zarah, Gil Arayos, and Shvichus Damim. Why? Because anything a kid does wrong in school, that's as bad as Avodah Zarah, Gil Arayos, Shvichus Damim. That's everything is. So he says like this: when Chazal say, for example, that a person who gets angry, it's like serving Avodah Zarah. They weren't just picking from the bag of scary averas to say. There's an aspect of Avodah Zarah that's there in anger, right? It's almost that the person worships himself and his own will. That rage when something happens in a way that you don't want it to be is really a type of self-worship. And certainly not looking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and how he would want it to be. And so too for many of these things. The Maharal explains this idea that Gasus HaRuach, right, which is an interesting phrase for arrogance. Gaiva is also called gasus haruach. Gas means something which is thick or dense. A denseness of spirit. The Maharal says, why is it compared to a person who had forbidden relations? Because the person's actually really physical. Because if he was living in a spiritual realm as it should be, he wouldn't be arrogant, right? He would see the world as it should be. He would see other people as they're really meant to be seen. He would see the neshama inside of them. Here, he's letting this worldly image of the world color what he sees and make him arrogance. Right? So he says, therefore, a Talmud Chacham has to be very careful about this. He says, maybe it's true, you're sitting in the Beis Medrash all day, and maybe you won't meet the same nisyonos that a person is in his trade show in Las Vegas or something like this. But, he says, you have to battle with all of these terrible midos, such as arrogance or other negative midos, which he says are chamurim k'mo kol ha'averos chamuros rachmana litzlan. Don't take them lightly. They are as, destructive and terrible as those active averos which are there. So he says, imkein ein lo bamelis nasel b'nei adam. A person has nothing to feel himself superior and to look down on other people. So the lesson from this is that you can't, again, a person obviously has to try to choose the best environment for themselves, right, when they are out doing what they have to do. But you can't beat the system by just locking yourself away. If you say, that's it, I'm going to lock myself in a Beis Medrash, I'm going to learn, I'm going to daven, phew, straight ticket to Gan Eden. Right? It's like, I'm immune. It says, absolutely not. The same battles are there in that environment. And the battle, it can be more fierce, and the Yetzer Hara can be more deceptive. It's much more difficult to fight against tendencies of arrogance or anger or things like this than if you're hungry and you're smelling a treifa hamburger. Okay? That's one battle, but these battles are very fierce and very difficult, and the stakes are very high. So a person can't think that just by the fact that I've arranged this situation for myself, that what I do in the day is I get up, I daven, I learn, I daven, I learn, I daven, I learn, I go to sleep. What could be wrong? Plenty. Okay, it's always there. On one hand, right, this should be very encouraging, because like it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, Vayar Elokim es kol asher asa. Hashem saw everything He made. V'hinei tov ma'od, and behold, it was very good. Chazal darshan tov is the Yetzer HaTov. Ma'od, very good, is the Yetzer Hara. Meaning, through the battles that we have, through overcoming those challenges, is how we grow. If a person were able to, by staying in the Beis Medrash, avoid all challenges of the Yetzer Hara, he wouldn't grow in life. He wouldn't be able to fulfill his purpose in life. So it should be encouraging, even if it's also a bit frightening like that. Okay, now, he says this was a particular warning to the Kohanim. We've spoken before about the discomfort people feel sometimes about Kohanim being different. And here's the first time, right, we saw in the last week's Parsha that Moshe Rabbeinu dressed Aaron in the Big Day Kohen Gadol, and they were just locked up for 7 days. And those 7 days, right, they say this was actually the roots of what we find in the Mishnah in Yoma, that the Kohen Gadol was separated for 7 days before Yom Kippur. It was a preparation period. They were come to bring and do avodah, to bring kapara on Am Yisrael. So these were very 7 intense days of tshuva and introspection and avodah and elevation. And therefore, on the 8th day, there's this little hint of the egel, meaning realize that you must not become arrogant after that time. You must not think that you are more choshuv than other people in Am Yisrael. Okay, that is the hint of the egel. And Rachmas Tzufka Rebbe, who brings it down, he finishes with this message. He says, "Musar haskel lomdei Torah." This is a message to those people who are learning Torah. Shelo yalu b'machshavta machshavos hisnasus. They should not let enter their minds any sense of arrogance. L'damos, to imagine shem chashuvim yosem mizulosam, that they are more important than their fellow Jew. Yan shem lomdei Torah, just because they learn Torah. They should look at all the different things Chazal said, that this is like that. You may be doing an Avera within the Beis Medrash that's equivalent to Avodah Zarah, that's equivalent to Gilui Arayos. Ha'ikar shetzarich lios onav b'li nidnu shel geus. The main thing is that a person has to have anova, has to have that humility without any arrogance. Now again, humility is not low self-esteem. Right? And humility doesn't mean thinking that you're a terrible Russia, etc. But it's being real, realizing that, I may not be the greatest tzaddik in the world, and I have no way of measuring, right? The Rambam says in Hilchos Tshuva, we have no way of measuring who's a tzaddik and who's a Russia, because even if we had a counter that counted up all the mitzvahs and averas, every mitzvah and avera has a relative weight, meaning if there was a mitzvah that was very easy for you to do, it's great, but it doesn't count as much as a mitzvah that was hard for you to do. If there was an avera that you could have resisted easily, so then that's a more negative thing than falling to an avera that you really would have had to fight a huge battle in order to resist. Only Hashem knows this accounting. Okay, that's what He reveals to us here. Now, this is very key to being a Kohen, because Aaron HaKohen has a few things. Number one, the Kohanim were not just those who served in the Beis HaMikdash, but there's a pasuk, Sifsei Kohen Yishmeru Das, that the lips of the Kohen are the guardians of knowledge, V'Torah Yavakshu Mipiu, and they will ask for Torah from his lips. Kohanim were also meant to be teachers. And a teacher also cannot be arrogant vis-a-vis the students. The Talmud Rebbe always points out with that famous statement, I think it was Rabbi Huda, right, who said that I learned a lot from my teachers. I learned more from my colleagues. From my students, I learned more than anyone else. So the standard parish of that is, because they question you, and because in order to get it clear to students, you really have to go over it well and get it across. He said he wasn't just describing a phenomenon of how the teacher learns and gets knowledge. It was a prerequisite for teaching, meaning, if you do not let the students understand that you respect them and you realize that you can learn something from them, okay, that they are a source of tremendous insight and knowledge that you can receive from them, then they're part of the process. If the teacher comes in with hisnasus, meaning I'm coming in looking down on these ignorant kids, right? You say, listen, you know nothing. I know everything. Keep your mouths shut, open your notebooks, and write down my wisdom. A kid wants to say, could we perhaps explain? Please. Okay, you don't know what you're talking about. Shutting it off stops the educational process. Instantly, it cuts it off. I remember years ago, there was, in Boston where I lived, so they sent what's called the SEED program, which is a wonderful program, right, where they send out yeshiva guys during vacation to different towns that don't have a kollel or yeshiva, and they come and they learn with people, and it's a nice vacation for them. It's a nice Torah boost for the community. So I had a friend there, a brilliant guy, astrophysicist, and he was set up with a chavrusa, with a boy, and I asked him, how'd you enjoy it? He said, I didn't. I said, why? He said, because we were starting to learn, and every time I started to make a comment, he would go, we're going to get to that soon, I'll explain it to you. And he said, I couldn't express anything. And it wasn't just hitting his pride, it wasn't the process. He was cut off. So the idea of the Kohen as the one who teaches, that certainly has to be there as well. They tell a story about the Chidush Yarim, the first Ger Rebbe. The Chidush Yarim was a Gaon, again, keep saying these phrases about everyone, but you can basically go into a good library and see the Sfarim of the Chidush Yarim on Shas and Shulchan Aruch, taking up a whole shelf. He finished all of those, I think, by the time he was 17 or 18. Okay, and then he went on to other stuff. Okay, so he was there. He was living in Warsaw at the time. He had a group of advanced Talmidim learning with him. One day, a country Jew comes in, schlepping a kind of reluctant, teenage son, bar mitzvah boy, whatever the age was, and he says, "You're the rabbi here?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Well, I think I want you to teach my son. Okay, I want to bring him here." He says, "Why do you want me to teach your son?" He says, "Because we have a little school in the town, but the teachers haven't been able to teach him anything. So I decided I want to go to somebody big. So you're supposed to be the best. So I want you to teach him." He says, "Okay, I'll try." And he took some time to learn with the boy, and he set some things up with him. And the boy started to learn. And he started to learn and grow. So some of the Chidush Yarim's Talmidim asked him, they said, "Rebbe, how are you successful?" In other words, you've never taught boys of that age. You've never taught boys who apparently have some kind of learning disability. And the teachers over there, I guess, they do teach children. How do you, who learn the highest level things with your kollel, how do you teach him? He said, I was faced with the problem before I started. I said, let me try to think what might have been the experience of this boy beforehand. Let's imagine that he came in on an equal footing at one point with the other kids his age, and the Rebbe taught them, and he didn't get it. The next year, the other kids go up a class. He's staying behind. And the Rebbe already looks at him as a problem kid. Oh, you were the one who didn't get it last year. And the second year, he doesn't get it. And it's more, now everyone looks down at him. So he says, all lines of communication were cut. It was a miserable experience for him. I decided to look at it this way. I've learned some Torah, it's true. But how much of the Torah have I learned? The Torah is Rechava Min Yam. The Torah is greater than an ocean. So the Torah, it's right, I may have written a shelf of Sfarim, but it's a tiny drop from the ocean. So really, compared to his drop and my drop, there's not that much difference, right? It's like one person, if there's a book of 1,000 pages, and one person read 100 pages, the other person read 300 pages. Okay, there's still, 700 pages to go. So he said, we're really involved in the same thing. And we're really kind of all at the beginning. And when I was able to learn with him like that, then the process was able to work. Okay, so that is another aspect of why the Kohen has to avoid this hisnasus. The other aspect that we find was Aaron HaKohen's great legacy. It says in Pirkei Avos, "Hevi mitalmidav shel Aaron, oiv shalom, rodev shalom, oiv es habrius u'mekarvim l'Torah." The ability to bring peace between people, the ability to draw a person close to Torah is only when there's a closeness, when they don't feel that you're coming and looking down upon them. Right? The Gemara describes very beautifully how Aaron would help be makarev a person from Torah. If he knew that someone was doing something wrong, he would simply hang out with him more, show him more affection. And eventually the person would kind of sense his internal contradiction. Aaron HaKohen sits with me, likes me. How can I do something like this? And that would very gently and naturally do these things. It wasn't coming from above. It was coming by sitting next to the person and drawing them close. And this leads us to a fascinating Gemara in Maseches Yuma. Gemara in Yuma tells the following story. Tanu Rabbanan, Maise b'Kohen Gadol, it's Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. Maise b'Kohen Gadol echad sheyatzu mibeis hamikdash. There was once a Kohen Gadol who went out of the Beis Hamikdash. V'hayu, right? It says v'havu azli kule alma basar. Everyone was running after him. And there's one Kohen Gadol, and people, they were escorting him out of honor. Maybe people wanted to get a bracha from him. Maybe people wanted to shake his hand, right? And I believe Mefarshim say this was even after Yom Kippur, after he did the avoda, right, that does everything for Am Yisrael. And then Kivan the Chazyu l'Shemaya v'Avtalyon came walking down the street, Shmaya and Avtalyon. Shmaya and Avtalyon were the greatest Talmidei Chachamim of the generation. One was the Nasi, one was the Av Beis Din. So Shavkuhu, they all left the Kohen Gadol, right? And they went running to Shmaya and Avtalyon. So Azli Basar Shmaya v'Avtalyon. So eventually, after the people got their brachas from Shmaya and Avtalyon came over, right, to give honor to the Kohen Gadol. Right? They came to greet him. And the Kohen Gadol said, Amar lahon, Yesun b'nei amamin l'shlam. He says, like peace unto the descendants of the nations. Shmaya and Avtalyon were descendants of Sancheriv, who was a very evil king that tried to wipe out Am Yisrael. And either they themselves were Gerei Tzedek or they were descended from Gerei Tzedek. There are different opinions in the Mefarshim. So the Kohen Gadol, who obviously comes in a straight line from Aaron HaKohen, was playing the Yichus card, right? And he was miffed that everybody left him to go run over to Shmaya and Avtalyon. So when Shmaya and Avtalyon came, he decided to give a little dig, and he says, peace unto the descendants of the nations. So they said to him, Amrulei, Yesun b'nei amamin l'shlam, let the children of the nations, right, have peace or come in peace. Da'avdin uvda da'aron, for they do the actions of Aaron. V'lo yesei bar Aaron l'shlam, but let not come to peace the descendant of Aaron, the lo avid uvda da'aron, who doesn't do the actions of Aaron. Okay, so on one hand, they gave him that musar, right, which was in place because he really was denying or defying the role of the Kohen Gadol, to come and to look down, number one, on the greatest Talmidei Chachamim in Am Yisrael, that the Kohen Gadol has to revere as well, right, because we know Chazal say, Talmid Chacham mamzer, if you have a Talmid Chacham, who unfortunately is a child of a relationship that was forbidden really on the Oraisa level, right, like an incest type relationship or an adulterous type relationship. Again, each according to the halacha. This person is kind of low on the yichus ladder. Can't really marry a regular Jew. But if that person's a Talmid Chacham, he comes before Kohen Gadol Am Haaretz. He is honored before the Kohen Gadol, who's on the top of the yichus tree, call it. But he's ignorant. Torah is that ultimate thing which is there. The Kohen Gadol has to give honor to those of Torah. But not only did he not respect them, he was upset about the respect that people gave to them, and he viewed himself as somehow better because of their lineage and his lineage. That's the exact opposite. That's not what he calls uvda da'aron, the actions of Aaron. That's the opposite. And we're all supposed to be Talmidei Aaron. We're all supposed to be students of Aaron in that way. Now, I believe it was the Sfas Emes, the Talmud Rebbe, I think, brought down from the Sfas Emes, who had a slightly different perush in the message they gave him. Right? The words that says, the Ovdin Uvda Da'aron, right? That the children of the nations, they kind of make the actions of Aaron. They do the actions of Aaron, meaning when the Kohen Gadol is there in the Beis Hamikdash doing his avoda, it's not all him. Am Yisrael have to be giving him the power, right? Their tefillah, their avoda, all those things are enabling, right? The Torah of the nation, the Talmidei Chachamim of the nation are actually the ones who are empowering the Uvda de Aaron. Meaning, don't think that it was all you, right? But in fact, we were behind you and with you in everything you did in the Beis HaMikdash. Not as a statement of arrogance, but stating the fact of the connection, rather than that idea of looking from above down that can be so dangerous.
That's one of the reasons why the mother of the Kohen Gadol would pass out things to...
Right, to the murderers in the Ir
Miklat.
Yeah, because...
They could be behind him as well.
Correct, because the Kohen Gadol has, right, Chazal ask, just fleshing it out what he said, it says the mothers of the Kohen Gadol would bring all sorts of goodies to people who killed accidentally but with negligence, and therefore had the penalty of exile to the Ir Miklat, the city of refuge, and they had a very interesting prison term. It was until the death of the Kohen Gadol. So they didn't want these guys to be having special Tillim sessions every day, davening that the Kohen Gadol should die so they could get out of there and go home. So they would bring them brownies and socks and all sorts of things like that. So they ask, right, why is it that should that affect the Kohen Gadol? With all due respect, these guys, they killed someone, so they're davening the Kohen Gadol should die. Should that have any influence? So they explain, yes, the Kohen Gadol has a responsibility for his generation. His tefillahs, his care is supposed to ensure that something like that won't happen on his watch. And that's why he's vulnerable. And their tefillahs have that point of vulnerability which is there. I'll just finish with the what we find later on in the Parsha, where we see Aaron HaKohen is about to do the avodah. It's time. And Moshe Rabbeinu tells him, Krav el HaMizbeach. He says, draw close to the Mizbeach. And why is that? So Chazal said Aaron was ashamed. Right now, there are different versions. Some of the Midrashim say that the Mizbeach appeared to him like an egel, or he saw an image of the egel on top of the Mizbeach. Meaning Aaron always felt that he was involved in the Chet HaEgel somehow. He somehow enabled it. And here that he's supposed to take his first step as a Kohen Gadol, so he saw this image in front of him, and he was ashamed. So Moshe Rabbeinu said to him, Lama atabosh lekach nivcharta. What are you being ashamed for? This is what you were chosen for. So many people explain that is, listen, our job is to do. Don't let shame, embarrassment, past events stop you from doing what Hashem wants you to do. Step up to the plate. The Baal Shem Tov had an interesting other twist on it. He says, Lama atabosh lekach nivcharta. You were chosen because you have that busha. You were chosen because you have that humility, because there's something in your past that stops you from having your nose up in the air, that you feel as you approach to ask for kapara for Am Yisrael's sins, that you feel that you also had a past of sins. That's exactly why you're the person for the job. Okay, so this is something that we're all supposed to be learning as Talmid of Shel Aaron, and hopefully that'll bring everyone to where they have to go. Have a wonderful week, wonderful Shabbos.